Welcome to the Sengoku Studies channel, and thank you for clicking on this video. Naval warfare is not a prominent topic in most discussions of pre-modern Japanese military history, especially in languages outside of Japanese, other than a few major events. This video is not intended to be an in-depth or thorough examination of the topic. I simply want to introduce you to some elements of naval warfare in the period from the 12th century through the 16th century. I do intend to come back to this in the future, as well as to cover the topic of so-called piracy. This video is part of the ongoing monthly collaboration series with some other creators in the YouTube Japanese history community. This monthly collaboration has been mainly between myself and 3 other channels so far: the Shogunate, Samurai and Ninja History, and Samurai Traditions of the Tadagenji. This image was sent to me for use by Anthony Cummins over on the Samurai and Ninja History channel. Although it seems to be mainly the 4 of us at the moment, this is not excluding others. Please, if you want to make a video about something regarding navies or maritime issues in pre-modern Japan, let me know and I will share it with the others, and add it to my playlist. The links to the videos for this month, as well as each creator's channel, will be in the pinned comment. Sa, hajimemashou. To begin with, it is important to make clear that Japanese naval warfare during this period was usually not deep-sea, deep-water warfare in the middle of the ocean. Rather, naval warfare took place predominantly in areas such as coastal regions, inland seas, straits, rivers, and lakes. I am not going to say that deep-water battle never took place. However, overwhelmingly, naval warfare took place in the types of locations previously mentioned. There were also what could be called amphibious operations. Ships were used to land troops on coast and shores to engage in land battles. Ships were also used for logistics, in support of land forces and campaigns, transporting things like troops, food, ammunition, and other supplies. We can see this even in the language used. The modern term for a navy or fleet is kaigun, meaning ocean army or ocean military. While this is not completely literally 100% of the time, meaning these forces are not exclusively ocean forces, the use of this word does show that there is an emphasis on more of the open ocean type of thing. For the pre-modern period, a very common word for a navy or fleet was suigun, which means water army or water military. Using this word does not have that implied emphasis on warfare out in the open ocean. Rather, its focus was on bodies of water in general. So try to avoid comparing Japanese naval warfare to, say, what is perhaps the most famous image of naval warfare in the West. There are no man of war or galleons blasting away at each other broadside after broadside out in the middle of the ocean. Next, I will cover the 3 main types of warships that would have been used during this period. Broadly, Japanese-style boats are called wasen. There are other types of warships that were used, plus boats that were not intended for war could be pressed into service. For right now, though, I just want to provide a general idea of these core warships. Also, in his video, Anthony Cummins on the Samurai and Ninja History channel went through some more pieces of the boats than I will here, so if you want some more details about that, you can find them there. The basic design of Japanese warships shows that they were not intended to travel and fight long distances on the open ocean. They tend to have relatively long and narrow frames. The hull of the ship usually sat fairly high in the water. What this means is that they were better suited for more shallow waters than the deep ocean. The small ship I will discuss here is called kobayabune, which means small fast ship. As the name implies, these ships were fast and maneuverable. However, because of their size, they were not the best suited for combat because they could not fit many men on them. In the Sengoku period, these ships were usually used as scouting and messenger ships, but would be engaged in battle as backup as well. Although, because of its speed and maneuverability, they may have been used by pirates in large numbers than, say, a daimyo's fleet. These ships could have walls along the sides to increase protection, or standing shields called tate could be used. The kobayabune may or may not have a roof over the deck. The mid-sized warship was called sekibune. Sometimes they were also referred to as hayabune because they were also fast and maneuverable, more so than the larger ships, but less so than the kobayabune. These ships were the main combat ships in a naval battle most of the time. They could have one or multiple decks, and they could be powered by sails or oars. They could be open, or they could have kind of a walled structure which enclosed the lower decks and provided some protection. The walls of this structure could have openings from which archers and eventually gunners could shoot from, while providing some sort of cover. Sometimes they could have doors that opened to aid in boarding. They could also sometimes be used as drop ramps operated by ropes that would be lowered in order to board an enemy ship. Not all were like this, as many were also solid structures, but these were some of the things that did exist in this structure that could be on the Sekibune. Towards the top of the ships in terms of size were the Atakebune. The Atakebune were massive floating fortresses with multiple enclosed decks. Not all fleets would have these types of ships. Some of them even had towers or small castle-like structures on them. These ships were significantly slower and less maneuverable than the other ones already discussed, so their effectiveness for combat is variable. They carried many more men on board than the other ships, but they were slow. Their main roles were as command ships, coordinating other ships, or as large-scale transports of troops and supplies. In either case, they would have been protected by smaller and faster ships. The walls of the structure of the Atakebune were like the ones on the Sekibune and could have holes and drop ramps and all those other things. These ships come from the mid to late 16th century though, so late in the Sengoku period. Therefore, the main warships through the vast majority of the pre-Edo period were the smaller ships. For added protection, the walls and roofs could be lined with rolls of bamboo or straw. This could turn out quite bad if one used straw and were hit with incendiary weapons, but this was an option to diminish the impact of regular arrows and gunfire. Before the introduction and eventual proliferation of gunpowder weapons, the main form of projectile weapons were arrows and rocks. Normal arrows could be used as anti-personnel weapons, or special arrows to try to cut the rigging. Incendiary arrows, called hiya, could be used to target the ship itself and try to set it on fire. There are two big issues with such incendiary arrows though. One was keeping them from going out as they flew through the air, and the other was making them effective against the enemy ship. The arrows could have cloth wrapped near the head of the arrow and then covered in resin. Natural tree resin was sticky and highly flammable. This decreased the chances of the fire going out. To increase the effectiveness of the incendiary arrows, ceramic containers filled with flammable oil or resin could be thrown or launched to make a more flammable surface for the arrows to hit, and thus more likely to catch fire. Rocks could also be thrown by hand or launched. One thing that some people do not think about is that rocks played a role not only in naval, but land battles as well. Rocks, like the clay containers, that could be launched using a tool that was like a net on the end of the pole. This gave more leverage, increasing the range of the projectiles. While it is not conclusive, there is some evidence that rocks may have been fired from Chinese-style firearms. When the Mongolian Yuan dynasty of China invaded Japan in the late 13th century, Japan was introduced to gunpowder weapons of war. With this, gunpowder weapons in time were added to the arsenal of naval warfare. Arrows could now be augmented with tubes filled with gunpowder and affixed with a fuse. These would provide distractions and a nuisance, but the explosion of the gunpowder itself would have limited impact. Small metal and ceramic pieces or small stones could be put into the tubes to create shrapnel. However, this tube would also weigh down the arrow. Another gunpowder weapon that began to find its way not only into naval but land battles as well were an early form of hand grenades, which went by various names. These were metal or ceramic containers filled with gunpowder and a fuse. When the gunpowder ignited, it would break the container, sending shrapnel in various directions. As with the tubes I just mentioned, these grenades could also be filled with material to increase the amount of shrapnel released from the explosion. Beginning in the 15th century, at least, Chinese-style firearms were imported into Japan. These were used in naval and land battles, but they were used in very small numbers due to a number of limitations which made them extremely hard to get a hold of. While they existed, they were very rare. These were like early European firearms, essentially small handheld cannons. In the 1540s, the Portuguese arrived in Japan, and they brought with them European-style matchlocks. In time, these gained more popularity than the earlier Chinese firearms did, and augmented archers on the ships. In time, small cannons would also be used on ships. However, the use of European-style heavy cannon was exceptionally rare. Possibly the most famous example of cannon use on ships is from the Third Siege of Nagashima in 1574 by Oda Nobunaga. Nobunaga used his fleet to blockade resupply of the Ikuiki defenders by the Muri and used cannon to bombard the defenders. This fleet was commanded by Kuki Yoshitaka, the commander of the Kumano Suigun, who had allied with Nobunaga. The Kumano Suigun was based in the province of Ki, also known as Kishu, which is modern Wakayama Prefecture and a part of Mie Prefecture. In time, rocket-like weapons were developed that could be fired from matchlocks and small cannon. These rockets could be solid or explosive, like other explosives filled with gunpowder and shrapnel pieces, and affixed with a fuse. And herein lays a bit of linguistic trouble. The incendiary arrows, the Chinese-style firearms, and these early rockets could all be referred to as Hia, so it can sometimes be tricky to figure out what is being used. Although sometimes also the period it is in and context will help to clear that up. However, these weapons existed at points in the naval arsenal. Now, not all naval battles occurred at projectile range, however. Close quarters boarding action turned boats into floating battlefields. When this happened, hooks attached to ropes and poles could be used to pull the ships closer to each other to allow for boarding. These were often on ships to help with docking and stuff when they come to land. Once close enough, they could be tied together and ramps could be used to board. How the boarding took place could vary, and was determined by a number of things, including what could be done in the heat of battle. Once the boarding happened, close quarters fighting would take place. The use of projectiles may continue. Archers and gunners might also board the boat, or the boarding could be predominantly melee. It would depend on what types of troops were involved, how many, how much room there was on the ship being boarded, and other factors. Melee could include the typical weapons of the day, such as various kinds of swords, daggers, naginata, nagamaki, yari, etc. There were also mentions of Chinese and Korean weapons being used among the kaizoku, or so-called pirates. But there were also special weapons for naval combat. Common among these were various pole arms that had barbs, hooks, spikes, or studs on the heads of them. They could be used as blunt force impact weapons, but the ones with barbs, hooks, and spikes were especially meant to try to snag and ensnare the enemy, to drag or push them off deck. There were also pole arms with a crescent or T-shaped head. These could be used to pin the enemy on deck to finish them off, or to push them off into the water. Something I want to mention here briefly is that some samurai were trained in suijitsu, or water arts, the most basic skill of which would have been swimming. This included learning special strokes to stay afloat and move in water while wearing full armor. There were even techniques to fight while treading water. Many movements were meant to conserve energy, but some of them were more dynamic and were used to climb onto a ship out of the water by basically using the movement and water to push themselves up. There were other exercises meant to increase strength and endurance, but not meant to be used in combat. How effective this would have been in the heat of battle, I am not sure. Even with this training, being plunged into the water in full armor was probably likely to lead to drowning, but this skill gave them at least some chance to try to survive. Some of these arts are still in practice in Japan today, merged with more competitive, sporting elements and aesthetic elements, and is now known as Nihon Eiho. There is more that could be covered, and I feel like I left out a lot of things that I wanted to say, but I think this is going to end up being a long video, plus it was kind of all over the place because I wanted to cover a broad spectrum of things. And granted, my knowledge of this topic is not very deep. I hope this has given you some insight into Japanese naval warfare in the 12th to 16th centuries. Again, the maritime and especially naval warfare aspects of Japanese history often seem to not get much attention, particularly in non-Japanese scholarship. So I hope that it has also shed some light on this being a much bigger and richer subject than many may have considered before. As I said, I would like to explore both the military and non-military aspects of this, as well as piracy in more depth in the future. Thank you for giving me your time in watching this video. Hopefully it has proved interesting and informative. Again, in the pinned comments, there will be links to the other videos for this month from the creators. Please go and check them out to explore Japanese naval warfare more. If you like my video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. I also look forward to seeing comments and criticisms you may have. I would like to say a special thank you to my Patreon members, Coulter Nebel, Roman Hunger, I'm still not quite sure which one it is, and Busho. I hope to see you again in the next video. Have a good day wherever you are, and please take care. Otsukare-sama deshita.